April 22, 1945. The Führerbunker, 9 meters beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden. General Hans Krebs stands before a map table, his hand trembling slightly as he points to a gap in the defensive lines northeast of Berlin. The gap is real. The divisions that are supposed to fill it are not. Krebs has been Army Chief of Staff for exactly 38 days, replacing Heinz Guderian after Hitler fired him for telling too many truths. Now Krebs faces the same impossible task, explaining to Adolf Hitler that the armies on his maps no longer exist. The bunker reeks of diesel fuel, damp concrete, and human sweat. 18 rooms, cramped and airless, connected by narrow corridors where staff officers squeeze past each other sideways. The ventilation system hums constantly but never quite clears the air. In the conference room, a single overhead light casts harsh shadows across the map table where Hitler has been commanding Phantom Armies for weeks. Hitler leans over the maps, his left hand shaking with the palsy that has worsened dramatically in recent months. He is 56 years old, but looks 70. His face is gray, his eyes bloodshot, his uniform jacket spotted with food stains. He shuffles when he walks, dragging his left leg. But when he focuses on the maps, something of the old intensity returns. He jabs a finger at a position northeast of Berlin. "Steiner will attack here," he says. "Army Detachment Steiner will cut through the Soviet lines and relieve the 9th Army." Krebs exchanges a glance with General Wilhelm Burgdorf, Hitler's Wehrmacht adjutant. Burgdorf's face is carefully neutral. They both know what Krebs must now explain. "My Führer," Krebs begins, his voice steady despite everything, "Army Detachment Steiner has not yet achieved the concentration necessary for when does the attack begin?" Hitler interrupts. Krebs takes a breath. "My Führer, the unit has encountered difficulties in assembling the required forces. This is the language they have learned to use. Not the unit doesn't exist, not those divisions are destroyed, but difficulties in assembling. Concentration not yet achieved. Elements still in transit. The vocabulary of evasion, the grammar of a command structure that stopped matching reality weeks ago." Hitler's hand stops shaking for a moment. He looks up at Krebs, he says. Then he returns to the maps, moving unit markers with his finger, repositioning divisions that exist only as names. 3 days earlier, on April 19th, Hitler had issued the order creating Army Detachment Steiner. On paper, it looked formidable. The 3rd SS Panzer Corps, elements of the 11th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, various Wehrmacht units being pulled from other sectors. The order specified 15,000 men with armor support to assemble northeast of Berlin and strike south into the Soviet forces encircling the city. SS Obergruppenführer Felix Steiner received the order at his headquarters north of Berlin. He was 58 years old, a veteran of both world wars, one of the architects of Waffen-SS tactical doctrine. He read the order and understood immediately that it was impossible. The 3rd SS Panzer Corps existed, technically, but it was scattered across 50 kilometers, engaged in fighting withdrawal, low on fuel, lower on ammunition. The 11th SS Panzer Grenadier Division had been reduced to perhaps 2,000 men. The Wehrmacht units mentioned in the order were either already committed to other sectors or had ceased to exist as coherent formations. Steiner made calls. He contacted unit commanders, logistics officers, anyone who might tell him where these forces actually were. The answers came back in fragments. 1 battalion here, another there. A company of this, a platoon of that. He could scrape together perhaps 5,000 men with no heavy weapons, no air support, no realistic prospect of success. He did not attack. In the bunker, Hitler waits for news of Steiner's offensive. The morning briefing on April 21st comes and goes with no report of the attack. The afternoon briefing brings word that Soviet forces are advancing in the north, that the encirclement of Berlin is tightening, that the Ninth Army is being pushed back. But nothing about Steiner. Hitler asks Krebs directly, "Has Steiner attacked?" Krebs has learned the truth from telephone calls to Steiner's headquarters. He knows that Steiner has not attacked, cannot attack, will not attack. But he also knows what happens to bearers of bad news. Krebs says, "This is April 21st. Hitler accepts the answer, or appears to." He continues the briefing, discussing other sectors, other phantom reinforcements. The conference ends. Hitler shuffles back to his private quarters, leaning heavily on the wall. But the truth is coming. It cannot be delayed much longer. April 22nd begins with Soviet artillery fire that can be heard even in the bunker, a distant rumble that makes the concrete walls vibrate slightly. The Red Army is now fighting in the suburbs of Berlin. The Ninth Army, which was supposed to defend the approaches to the city, has been cut off and encircled southeast of Berlin. General Theodor Buss commands what remains of it, perhaps 50,000 men trapped in the forests around Halbe, running out of ammunition, being hammered by Soviet forces from 3 sides. Hitler has ordered Busse to break out and march to Berlin. Busse has tried to explain that his army is surrounded, that a breakout would require ammunition and fuel he doesn't have, that even if successful, it would take days to reach Berlin. Hitler has responded by ordering the 12th Army under General Walter Wenck to march east and link up with Busse, and then both armies to relieve Berlin together. On the maps, it looks feasible. The 12th Army is west of Berlin, the 9th Army is southeast of Berlin. If they both push toward the city, they could theoretically break the Soviet encirclement. In reality, the 12th Army is fighting American forces on the Elbe River, is under strength, is running on fumes. Wenck has received Hitler's order and understood that it is a death sentence. He will make some attempt to move east, not to relieve Berlin, but to create an escape corridor for refugees and remnants of the Ninth Army. But he has no illusions about reaching Hitler. The morning briefing on April the 22nd begins at 10 o'clock. Present are Hitler, Krebs, Burgdorf, General Wilhelm Keitel, the Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, and General Alfred Jodl, Keitel's Chief of Operations. Also present are various adjutants, stenographers, and staff officers who crowd the small conference room. Hitler is agitated from the start. He has not slept well. The medication cocktail his personal physician has been giving him, a mixture of stimulants, sedatives, and other drugs whose exact composition no one fully knows, is no longer working as it once did. His hands shake more than usual. His voice, when he speaks, has a tremor in it. Krebs begins the briefing with a situation report. Soviet forces advancing from the north, from the east, or from the south. The Ninth Army encircled. The 12th Army engaged on the Elbe. Berlin's defenses contracting. Hitler interrupts. What about Steiner? Has Steiner attacked? The room goes silent. Every officer present knows the answer. They have all been briefed on the situation. Steiner has not attacked because Steiner cannot attack because army detachment. Steiner does not exist in any meaningful sense. Krebs looks down at his notes. Then he looks up and meets Hitler's eyes. He says carefully. The words hang in the air. Insufficient forces. Not unable to launch. Hitler stares at Krebs. His face, already grey, seems to drain of what little color it had. His mouth opens slightly, then closes, then opens again. Quote 20, he repeats, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. Quote 21. Hitler's hand slams down on the map table. The sound echoes in the small concrete room like a gunshot. "Steiner!" he shouts. The quiet voice is gone. Now it is a roar, loud enough to be heard through the closed door, loud enough to startle the secretaries in the outer rooms. Steiner was ordered to attack. It was an order. How dare he disobey? Keitel steps forward, his tall frame stooping slightly in the low-ceilinged room. He is 63 years old, a career officer who has spent the last 6 years as Hitler's yes man, earning the contemptuous nickname Kantioptuas, quote, Dontowards Comprates 24. A play on Tpa, or quote, 25, meaning lackey. But even Keitel, who has agreed to every insane order, every impossible demand, cannot maintain the fiction any longer. Quote, 26. Keitel says, his voice firm, quote, 22, Hitler wheels on him. Quote, 28. Quote, 29. Jodl interjects, speaking for the first time, quote, 30. Quote, 31. Hitler shouts, quote, 32.2. His face is red now, spittle forming at the corners of his mouth. His whole body shakes, not just his hands. The officers around the table stand frozen, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Quote, 33. Hitler continues, his voice rising to a scream. Quote, Dial 4. Krebs tries again. Quote, 35. Quote, 6. Hitler's left hand is shaking so violently that he has to grip the edge of the table with his right hand to steady himself. I'm surrounded by traitors, cowards. The entire Wehrmacht is filled with cowards who refuse to fight. Bergdorf, standing near the door, closes his eyes briefly. He has been with Hitler since 1944, has watched the deterioration, has participated in the purges after the July 20th bomb plot. He knows what comes next. The war is lost, Hitler says suddenly, his voice dropping from a scream to something flat and dead. The war is lost. Everyone has betrayed me. The army has betrayed me. The SS has betrayed me. The German people have betrayed me. The officers exchange glances. This is new. Hitler has never before admitted the war is lost, not in their hearing. He has raged, he has blamed, he has demanded impossible victories. But he has never before spoken these words. Keitel finds his voice. My Führer, we must act. We must leave Berlin. We can establish a new headquarters in the south, in Bavaria, and continue. No. Hitler straightens up, releasing his grip on the table. His shaking has subsided slightly. When he speaks again, his voice is cold, controlled. I will stay in Berlin. I will stay here and direct the defense, and I will shoot myself when the end comes. The room is absolutely silent. The only sound is the distant rumble of artillery and the hum of the ventilation system. Jodl tries to salvage something from the wreckage. My Führer, if you will not leave Berlin, then we must establish a clear command structure for the remaining forces. General Wenck's 12th Army can still... Wenck! Hitler seizes on the name. Yes. Wenck will relieve Berlin, order Wenck to disengage from the Americans and march east immediately. The 12th Army will break through to Berlin and lift the siege. Jodl and Keitel exchange a look. The 12th Army. Wenck's force, which is supposed to be facing the Americans on the Elbe River, which is under strength, which has no fuel for a sustained advance, which even if it could march east would take days to reach Berlin through Soviet lines. But they do not argue. Not now. Not after what they have just witnessed, Jodl says. The briefing continues, but something has broken. Hitler slumps in his chair, occasionally rousing himself to issue orders. Orders for units to attack, orders for defenses to hold, orders that bear no relationship to the actual situation. The generals respond with, quote, 48, quote, and, quote, 49, quote, and write down orders they know cannot be executed. When the briefing finally ends, Hitler shuffles out of the conference room without another word. The generals remain, looking at each other across the map table covered with its neat markers representing armies that no longer exist. Bergdorf asks quietly. Keitel straightens his uniform jacket. Quote, 51, he says. Quote, 52. It is a formula they have perfected over the past weeks. Transmit the impossible orders, let the field commanders deal with reality, report back to Hitler in language that obscures the truth. A system of organized delusion maintained by men who know better, but lack the courage or the will to stop. Krebs gathers his papers. As chief of staff, It is his job to translate Hitler's orders into actual military directives. He will call Wenck's headquarters and transmit the order to march east. He will call Busse's headquarters, if he can still reach them through the Soviet jamming, and transmit the order to break out. He will call Steiner and transmit another order to attack, knowing that Steiner cannot attack. Outside the conference room in the narrow corridor, staff officers and adjutants have heard the shouting. Word spreads quickly through the bunker. The Führer has had a breakdown. The Führer says the war is lost. The Führer is staying in Berlin. Traudl-Junge, one of Hitler's secretaries, hears the news from another secretary. She's been in the bunker for weeks now, typing orders and letters, watching Hitler deteriorate. The shouting from the conference room was loud enough to hear through the closed doors. Now, as staff members whisper in corners, she begins to understand that something fundamental has changed. In his quarters, Hitler sits on his narrow bed, his head in his hands. Eva Braun, his longtime companion who has insisted on staying with him in the bunker, tries to comfort him. He waves her away. For a few moments, he sits in silence. Then he calls for his adjutants. When they arrive, Hitler is standing again, his composure partially restored. He issues a flurry of orders. Göring is to be arrested for treason. Himmler is to be removed from all positions. The defense of Berlin will be organized into sectors. Civilians are to fight to the last. Anyone who retreats will be shot, and the armies will attack. Wenck will attack from the west. Busse will attack from the southeast. Steiner will attack from the north. Berlin will be relieved. The situation will be restored. The adjutants write down the orders and hurry out to transmit them. In the communications room, the radio operators send out the messages. At 12th Army headquarters, west of Berlin, General Walter Wenck receives the order to march east and relieve the capital. He is 44 years old, one of the youngest generals in the Wehrmacht, a skilled tactician who has somehow managed to keep his army relatively intact. He reads the order and then calls his staff together. Quote, 53, he tells them. His officers stare at him. They are on the Elbe River, facing American forces. Between them and Berlin are at least 100 kilometers and several Soviet armies. Wenck says finally. Quote 5. His officers nod. It is the sanest order they have heard in weeks. At 9th Army headquarters, or what remains of it, a collection of vehicles in a forest southeast of Berlin, General Theodor Busse receives the order to break out and link up with Wenck. He is 50 years old, a capable officer who has watched his army disintegrate over the past week. He has perhaps 50,000 men left, surrounded, running out of ammunition, being pounded by Soviet artillery. The order to break out is not insane. It is, in fact, the only chance his men have. But the order to then march on Berlin and relieve the capital is fantasy. Busse decides he will break out west toward Wenck, and then both armies will surrender to the Americans if possible. He will not throw his men's lives away on a relief attempt that cannot succeed. At Steiner's headquarters north of Berlin, SS Obergruppenführer Felix Steiner receives yet another order to attack. This one is more specific, more detailed, assigning him units that he knows for certain do not exist. He reads it twice, then puts it aside. He will not attack. He has already decided that when Soviet forces reach his position, he will order his men to break contact and move west, away from Berlin, toward the possibility of surrendering to Western forces. The orders have been transmitted. The field commanders have received them, and each commander, in his own way, has decided to interpret them as he sees fit, to do what he believes gives his men the best chance of survival. In the bunker, Hitler waits for reports of the attacks. The evening briefing on April 22nd brings no news of Wenck's advance, no news of Busse's breakout, no news of Steiner's attack. Krebs presents a situation report that focuses on defensive actions, on units holding their positions, on anything except the phantom offensives that were supposed to relieve Berlin. Hitler listens in silence. His rage from the morning has burned out, leaving behind something worse, a kind of disconnection from reality so complete that he seems to exist in a parallel world where his orders are being carried out, where armies are marching, where victory is still possible. "Wenck will arrive in 3 days," he says at one point. "The 12th Army will break the encirclement, and then we will counterattack. The Soviets will be driven back from Berlin." The generals nod and say nothing. Over the following days, the pattern repeats. Each morning and evening, briefings are held. Krebs presents situation reports that are increasingly grim. Soviet forces in the city center, the defensive perimeter contracting, ammunition running low, civilian casualties mounting. And each time, Hitler responds by ordering attacks by armies that do not exist or cannot move. "Where is Wenck?" he asks on April the 23rd, April the 24th, April the 25th. "Why hasn't Wenck attacked? Why hasn't the 12th Army reached Berlin?" The answers vary, but the substance is always the same. Difficulties, delays, heavy resistance. Never the truth. Wenck is not coming. Wenck is moving east slowly, opening an escape route, preparing to surrender to the Americans. Wenck has no intention of dying in Berlin. On April the 25th, Soviet and American forces link up at Torgau on the Elbe River. Germany is now cut in two. The 9th Army, or what remains of it, begins its breakout attempt, fighting desperately westward toward Wenck's positions. Tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians die in the forests around Halbe, caught between Soviet forces. Some make it through to Wenck's lines. Most do not. In the bunker, Hitler orders the 9th Army to turn around and attack Berlin from the southeast. The order is transmitted. It is not obeyed because it cannot be obeyed. The 9th Army is fighting for its life, not launching offensives. "They have all betrayed me," Hitler says again during a briefing on April 26th. His voice is flat, emotionless. "Every general, every officer, they have all betrayed me." Krebs tries to explain the situation, tries to make Hitler understand that the units he is ordering to attack have been destroyed or are fighting for survival. Hitler cuts him off. "I gave orders. Orders are to be obeyed. If they are not obeyed, it is treason." The logic is perfect and insane. Orders are given. Orders are not carried out. Therefore, treason. The possibility that the orders are impossible does not enter into the equation. Nikolaus von Below, Hitler's Luftwaffe adjutant, watches these briefings with growing horror. He has been with Hitler since 1937, has seen the victories and the defeats, has watched the transformation from confident warlord to this shuffling, delusional figure who commands ghost armies. In his diary, he writes that Hitler seems to exist in a world entirely separate from reality, a world where the maps still show strong defenses and powerful armies, where victory is always just one more attack away. On April the 27th, Soviet forces are fighting in the Tiergarten, less than a kilometer from the Reich Chancellery. Artillery fire is constant. The bunker shakes with nearby explosions. The ventilation system can no longer clear the smoke and dust that seeps in from above. Hitler holds a briefing. He orders the 9th Army to attack from the southeast. He orders Wenck to attack from the west. He orders Steiner to attack from the north. He moves unit markers on the map, showing how the three armies will converge on Berlin and crush the Soviet forces in a massive encirclement. The generals stand silent. There is nothing left to say. The 9th Army has ceased to exist as a coherent force. Wenck is 60 kilometers away and not moving closer. Steiner has dispersed his units and is preparing to surrender. Quote 63. Hitler says, studying the map. Quote 64. Keitel and Jodl exchange a glance. They have already begun planning their own departures from Berlin. They will leave the bunker in the next day or two, ostensibly to coordinate the relief efforts, actually to escape before the Soviets close the last routes out of the city. On April 28th, Keitel and Jodl leave the bunker. They tell Hitler they are going to personally supervise Wenck's advance. Hitler accepts this. He shakes hands with them, gives them final orders to ensure Wenck attacks immediately. They drive west through the ruined streets of Berlin, through the Soviet artillery fire, and escape the city. They will not see Hitler again. In the bunker, now without his top military advisors, Hitler continues to hold briefings with whoever remains. Krebs, Bergdorf, junior officers, adjutants. The pattern does not change. He issues orders for attacks. He asks where Wenck is. He moves markers on maps. On April 29th, Soviet forces are within 300 meters of the Reich Chancellery. The sound of small arms fire can be heard in the bunker. Hitler marries Eva Braun in a small ceremony. Then he dictates his political testament, blaming the Jews, the generals, the German people for the defeat. He names Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor, and he issues more orders. The 12th Army will attack. The 9th Army will attack. Relief is coming. On the morning of April 30th, Hitler holds his last military briefing. Krebs presents a situation report. Soviet forces in the Reichstag, in the government quarter, approaching the Chancellery. No word from Wenck. No word from any relieving force. Hitler listens without comment. Then he asks, one final time, where is Wenck? Krebs has no answer. Or rather, he has the answer but cannot bring himself to say it. Wenck is not coming. Wenck was never coming. The 12th Army exists, but it is not marching on Berlin. It is moving west, away from Berlin, away from the Soviets, toward the Americans. Hitler nods slowly, as if Krebs has confirmed something. He dismisses the briefing. He shakes hands with the staff members present, thanks them for their service. Then he and Eva Braun retire to his private quarters. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, a single gunshot echoes through the bunker. The staff members in the corridor freeze. Then they rush to Hitler's quarters. They find him slumped on a sofa, a gunshot wound to his right temple, a pistol on the floor. Eva Braun is beside him, dead from cyanide poisoning. The bodies are carried up to the Chancellery garden and burned in a shell crater, doused with gasoline, set alight. Soviet artillery fire continues to fall around them. The staff members who perform this final service shovel dirt over the smoking remains and hurry back underground. In the bunker, Krebs and Bergdorf face the question of what to do next. Krebs decides to attempt negotiations with the Soviets. He crosses the lines under a white flag and meets with Soviet commanders. He informs them that Hitler is dead. He attempts to negotiate a ceasefire. The Soviets demand unconditional surrender. Krebs returns to the bunker and reports this to the remaining staff. There will be no negotiated peace. There will be no last-minute relief. The war is over. On May 1st, Krebs and Bergdorf commit suicide in the bunker. Other staff members attempt to break out through Soviet lines. Some succeed. Most do not. In the forests west of Berlin, General Wenck's 12th Army is disintegrating. Soldiers are deserting, heading west toward American lines. Wenck himself will surrender to American forces on May 7th. The remnants of the 9th Army, those who survived the breakout from Halbe, have already surrendered or been captured. Steiner's forces have dispersed. Steiner himself will be captured by British forces in May. The Phantom Armies that Hitler ordered to attack in those final days never attacked because they never existed, not in any meaningful sense. The generals who stood in the bunker and listened to the orders knew this. They knew the units on the maps were destroyed, scattered, or too weak to attack. They knew that no relief was coming, that no counter-offensive would restore the situation, that the war was lost. Some of them tried to explain this to Hitler. Krebs, Jodl, Keitel, they all attempted, in their careful, deferential way, to make him understand reality. But Hitler could not or would not accept it. He existed in a world where orders created reality, where units existed because they were on the map, where victory was always possible if only his subordinates would obey. And the generals, for their part, continued to transmit the orders. They continued to say, quote, 66, quote, and quote, 67, quote. They continued to maintain the fiction, even as they made their own plans to survive, to escape, to surrender.